Today is the 20th of March. This was scheduled for 2023. This is the Sunil Chandra oration, which will be delivered by Professor Madhumita Dobe. But before that, I will request the President of the West Bengal Academy of Science and Technology, who is here with us, to introduce the individual whose name this oration is and to give a little background about the West Bengal Academy of Science and Technology. So may I please request Professor Chakraborty to please করে দিচ্ছি আমার এখানে করে দিচ্ছি আছে এটা আছে স্লাইডটা
So, warm greetings on behalf of West Bengal Academy of Science and Technology. Just a few words without wasting much time on the academy. I don't know how many of you are aware what is an academy, but you might be aware what is an institution, because there are a lot of institutions, professional institutions on science, on engineering, on many other things, arts, so many other things. Academy is basically an organization which is a little bit different from institutions, where you can apply, you can pay, and you can become members. Academy, you can do that. Academy is all based on nominations. And who can nominate? Only those who are already fellows of that academy. That means we have very eminent fellows here present. One is, of course, Professor Mitali Chatterjee, one of the most eminent fellow of our academy. Another fellow here is Professor Sabinath. And any other fellow? Okay, also Dr.
Both of them are going to be fellows.
Okay, also another one there. Since we have not met personally, so I beg to be excused. So what happens is, if you do something good, if you contribute to your domain of science and technology, then your peers or your seniors can nominate you, and you become, through a proper selection process, which is very competitive. And because you can see who are already elected, you can see they are highly eminent people. So to become a fellow, you have to be somebody in your domain. And I wish that at least some of you who are sitting over here, maybe after 10-15 years, we can see one of you or two of you as fellows of our academy. And we do quite a few different types of activities. A couple of them are what do you call the endowment talks. That means somebody has given some money to the academy in memory of somebody who were very special in their particular science and technology domain. And one of them is Dr. Sunil Chandra Bose. Sunil Chandra Bose. This is a memorial talk on Dr. Sunil Chandra Bose. Every year we organize this. This year we are just a little bit late, but still it is within the year 23-24. So this slide is being shared now about the person on whom this endowment talk is based. Yeah. So you can see, and I welcome also, I forgot to mention that all the fellows, all the research scholars, students, and ladies and gentlemen in the online mode, because this program is currently being streamed live in YouTube. So I request maybe one or two of you just to go to YouTube on your mobile and just find the West Bengal Academy of Science and Technology channel and just see how it is coming, because then we can also know that how it is being streamed live. So you can check also that one. So as you can see, Dr. Sunil Chandra Bose, fifth son of Janakinath Bose and Prabhavati Devi. And of course, he is the elder brother of none other than Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. He studied medicine at the medical college, as you can see, 1914 to 18. Then DTM London, MRCP London between 1920-25, and in his own right, he is an eminent person in the area of medical science. And that's why this lecture every year we organize in the domain of medical science. And we have 13 different sectional committees in West Bengal Academy covering entire spectrum of science and technology. Whatever you can name it, we have one sectional committee, and that's medical science sectional committee is led by Professor Mitali Chatterjee. So she is a key person behind this particular program, and I convey my sincere thanks to the organizers led by Professor Chatterjee, and of course the institute and the institute administration for allowing us to hold this here. And we are very honored to have a very distinguished person as a speaker on this occasion, Professor Madhumita Dobe. You will hear about her and her talk. So we are all eagerly waiting for that. So I don't want to. Okay, just a little bit of okay, sharing. পুরোটা করো, স্ক্রিনটা করে দাও, এন্টায়ার স্ক্রিন করে দাও। Yes. So we can also see that a major contribution of Dr. Bose was as he brought the first ECG machine, and that too in 1926. So almost no, exactly 98 years back. And he attended on several luminaries as an expert on medical science. 1926, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose in Mandalaya Jail in Burma. Then Rabindranath Tagore in Kolkata in 1931. Then Swami Abhedananda in 1934. Mahatma Gandhi in 1937. The who is who of India at that particular point of time. And very importantly, in 1946, Dr. Sunil Chandra Bose founded the very well-known and esteemed society called Cardiological Society of Bengal. He passed away on November 17, 1953 in Kolkata. So we dedicate this talk today to be given by Professor Madhumita Dobe in the fond memory of Dr. Sunil Chandra Bose. So now okay, so Professor Mitali Chatterjee, convener of our medical science sectional committee, will introduce the esteemed speaker today. So Professor Chatterjee.
It's not. Window. এসছে কোনটা কি আসছে স্ক্রিনটাই আছে দুটো এটা আসছে স্টপ শেয়ারিং করো স্টপ শেয়ারিং করো স্টপ শেয়ারিং করো আবার শেয়ারিং এ যাও এন্টায়ারটা করো এন্টায়ার স্ক্রিন করো হ্যাঁ শেয়ার স্ক্রিন ওকে নাও গো টু ফুল স্ক্রিন okay done okay super okay right so has it come okay right okay so it really gives me great pleasure to introduce today's speaker there are two things which stand out in common with the orator as also the name person in whose the oration is. So Dr. Sunil Chandra Bose and Professor Madhumita Dobe, and in fact, I can also proudly say myself and Professor Shrutinat Mukherjee, we have a common alma mater in that Dr. Bose graduated from the Medical College of Bengal. I specifically say Medical College of Bengal because a lot of people have distorted it and made it into Calcutta Medical College. Then it has become Kolkata Medical College, but I always go back to the admit card that I have where it says Medical College Bengal. So Professor Madhumita Dobe is a graduate of Medical College Bengal. She has then done her MD in community medicine as also a master's in community health from Australia. She retired very recently, but before that she was the former dean and the professor director at the All India Institute of Hygiene and Public Health in Kolkata. So Professor Dobe is presently the founder member and chairperson of FAITH, which is a foundation for actions and innovation towards health promotion. She wears several hats, but I will only focus on a few special interests, which is to deals with health promotion and education, behavioral epidemiology, health communication, maternal and childhood, with a special focus on One Health and qualitative research. She has served on several scientific advisory committees and continues to mentor many people in the city as also nationally and internationally, and has over 100 peer-reviewed publications to her credit. So I won't stop between you and Madhumita D, if I may introduce you that way, to tell us about a very interesting topic that she will be sharing with us. So over to you. So before that, let them get it into presentation mode. Come, please.
Reflection.
Desktop. ওটা মিনিমাইজ করে দাও।
Full desktop to put.
Minimize.
Reflection.
I was sharing it with her. Yeah, stop there. Entire screen. Huh? Entire screen এ চলে গেলে best. Entire screen এ যাও। হচ্ছে না? আচ্ছা, ঠিক আছে, fine. As you can see, we are not pros.
No,
We are working on the website under construction. ঠিক আছে। Right.
Good afternoon and thank you very much. West Bengal Academy of Science and Technology, particularly Mitali, who again may I take the privilege of addressing by first name, for inviting me to this to share with you something which is very close to my heart, the history of public health in Kolkata. It's actually a very big journey, and it is something which I feel all of us should be knowing about. Since its heydays, since Kolkata's heydays, public health has actually been a very focused area. Many things happened here first. Many things showed the way to do things in future. Many reflections happened. So why history at all? Why should we look back? History teaches us a lot of things. History teaches us how to look at the context of diseases, the social conditioning of diseases, what happens, why diseases do emerge, why are they re-emerging. We understand once we also look back before we look forward. It also provides us with time trends, and it provides critical perspective. Any action is always taken for the benefit of people. But such actions sometimes also prove counterproductive. So let's look back to see what we've done right and wrong, and so that we do not replicate mistakes. And I'll be, in the process, not giving you any lecture, but sharing certain stories. So this is a storytelling session. And let's start with the beginning. Where do I begin? That's a very big question in my mind when I started. So the picture, as you know, is of Rudyard Kipling. He was born in Bombay, moved off to England in his childhood, came back to India as a journalist, and then he visited Kolkata. He was appalled by the situation in Kolkata and wrote The City of Dreadful Nights, where comes the famous quotation which you must have read in many places. Thus, the midday halt of Charnock, more's the pity, grew a city as the fungus sprouts chaotic from its bed, so it spread, chance directed, chance erected, laden built on the silt, palace, byre, hovel, poverty and pride side by side, and above the packed and pestilential town, death looked down. So you can understand it's a terrible situation out there right from the beginning. Now, this was from, unfortunately, when we looked at, I've written a small book on history of public health in Kolkata during those days. But when we were referencing, we found nothing which was documented from the elite of Bengal. So it was mostly the British travelers, British Mem Sahibs to be true to them. They had written back letters to their homeland, to their relatives. And one such, Jemima Kindersley, she says, anyone who can afford a plot of land built a house. And it's very weird. I mean, I found it very weird that these things with houses breaking down and things like that, and my oration comes almost simultaneously. The situation is too much of coincidence. So there were no regulations related to construction. People were constantly building, and what they built was dependent on personal taste. There was no regard to the beauty or regularity of the town. And that's what you find is a stark difference between towns well-planned and towns unplanned, like Kolkata. So this created a city that was a mishmash of buildings and with no zoning laws. So you could have a straw hut built next to a fine house, or a shoddy house next to a door to a commercial warehouse. So we had a terrible state of affairs. Coming to the next part, obviously, when you have houses everywhere, you do not have enough civic amenities. So that's where poor sanitation came in. And again, to share some of what the foreigners wrote about us, Calcutta was little better than an undrained swamp in the immediate vicinity of a malarious jungle. The ditch surrounding it, we all know that we had a ditch all around Calcutta, as it had been for 30 years previously an open cloaca. Its riverbanks were scattered with dead bodies of men and animals. Just imagine that. It was in that situation that Calcutta grew. The general, coming to Bhawanipur, this is very close. And I particularly chose this because PG hospital is right at the fringe of what then was Bhawanipur. So the general sanitary condition of Bhawanipur is no good. There are many places which are not passable on account of the stink of dung, urine, and human filth. The roads are not clean. The drains are deep. The refuse water of the house is emptied into them and stands there without least notice being taken by the road overseers. So they were supposed to look after it. Many small lanes became inaccessible in the morning on account of the excrement being found strewed on them. The situation worsens in rainy season. Most of the roads are in very bad repair. Dead dogs, cats, rats, and the bodies of other decomposed animals are always found on the sides of the street. Some other reports and letters show that North Calcutta was even worse. Most important streets and thoroughfares of North Calcutta form to all intents and purposes a series of huge public latrines, the abominable condition of which cannot adequately be described. And there were complaints of privies from the houses opening out on drains along the borders of the streets. And there was just a 4-anna fine, so people didn't bother. Grapre, another traveler, he said, the canals and cesspools of the city as completely filled with dead and decaying animal matter. The streets as awful and infested with swarms of flies, and the crowd and flocks of animals and birds acting as scavengers, which was also the observation of William Mackintosh, another traveler. The very small portion of cleanliness which Calcutta enjoys is owing to the presence of hungry jackals by night and ravenous vultures, kites and crows by day. So that's what was happening. So it is very apt that when the municipal corporation was actually brought up, adjutant birds were then very common in Kolkata, known locally as hargila. And no longer can you see them. They're all dead. Mostly vultures and hargilas are no longer seen. They were valued as scavengers. And the first emblem of the corporation in 1896, I think it still remains, represented 2 adjutant birds holding serpents in their beaks and carrying the crown on the shoulders. So that was what we came up with. Another very weird coincidence is that it's raining today. And when raining in Kolkata rains, of course, this is not a downpour, but when there are downpours, we are worried. We are worried about waterlogging, going back to our houses and other problems which come with it. But waterlogging actually goes back to the times when Calcutta used to be a collection of these fishing hamlets. And interspersed with marshy lands, forests, creeks and canals, these actually connected the Hooghly River on the west to the salt lakes on the east. So these were isolated villages interspersed with canals and creeks. These creeks and canals, they served as the natural drainage system for both rainwater and sewage, which were carried along the natural incline, dhal jetake bole. That is from the river towards the east, not the other way around. So naturally, water doesn't flow towards the river. It flows in the other direction. So, and gets deposited in the salt lakes. The tides carried away the excess rainwater and sewage to the sea. So, as you can see here, we'll come to that later on. Apart from the creeks and canals, a large number of tanks in each hamlet, they collected and stored the excess rainwater. And you can see from a picture of that period that there were quite a number of tanks in that area in Kolkata. Now, where was waterlogging more common? It still is common, I suppose. Densely populated areas on the riverbank, especially markets of Bara Bazaar, and there was an old pilgrim's way to the Chitpur area, So that got flooded during heavy downpours. The settlement around the Great Tank, which is our BBT Bagh, that would also be inundated during heavy bouts of rain. So obviously, these became the breeding grounds of vectors and germs, and we had malaria and cholera, kept on having it. The problem of frequent waterlogging during monsoons actually started increasing when the East India Company took up Calcutta and said that we'll make it into a presidency. So there was a lot of growth, unplanned growth again. So tanks and creeks were all filled in. And in the next slide, you will see, at least to give you some idea, that many such were totally blocked and could not drain out water. In fact, Calcutta grew rapidly in the 19th century to become the second most important city of the British Empire after London. Now, what happened? There was closure of the natural drainage routes. So waterlogging happened and waterborne epidemics were happening. So what did we do? We took emergency measures. We built several rudimentary narrow sewers, dug them up to drain the sewage and rainwater into the Hooghly River. But will that help? No. Because the incline was the other way around. This plan itself was faulty. Flow was against the natural slope. So more stagnation of filth and rainwater during monsoon actually complicated the problem further. In 1803, Lord Wellesley, who was then the Governor General, published detailed minutes of a meeting condemning the sad state of municipal affairs in Kolkata, especially the poor condition of drinking water, extremely unhealthy sanitation, and the faulty drainage system in the city. And if you have time later on, or those of you who would like to go back to the presentation later on, you can see from these pictures, you can find how so many tanks were actually filled up to build houses. The situation persists till the day. Still today, we face the same problem. So we had a town reforms committee. This is Lord Wellesley. He in 1803 said that it is the primary duty of the government to provide for health, safety, and convenience of the inhabitants of this great town by establishing a comprehensive system for roads, streets, paths, drains, and water, by fixing permanent rules. So we lacked any rules and regulations, So we could construct houses anywhere, wherever, public edifices, build something everywhere, anywhere and everywhere. It still remains, particularly your religious institutions are sometimes create great problems, and for the regulation of nuisance of every description. So the defects of the climate of Calcutta during the latter part of the rainy season may indeed be ascribed in a great measure to the state of the drains and watercourses and to stagnant water remaining in the town and its vicinity. We all know now, even a baby knows, that that's where mosquitoes grow, that's where other vectors grow as well. So the health, he said, could certainly be improved by an improvement of the mode of drainage and cleansing the streets, the roads, and esplanade. So after he mentioned this, and the Town Reforms Committee really was vociferous about it, this report, it resulted in appointment of justices of peace. Some of us have seen some of them earlier in our childhood days. We used to have justice of peace written on name plaques outside their houses also. So early municipal officers and formation of improvement committee to look into the issues of sanitation, waterlogging, waste disposal, and health. So all they could do was excavate a canal, a circular canal, Beleghata Canal, many of you have probably seen. So this extended from the inlet of the Maratha ditch in Bagbazar to the Salt Lake, to Chingrihata, what is now Chingrihata, that is the inlet of Salt Lake. The existing open drains of Chitpur, Bagbazar, Shobha Bazar, and Nimtala then were connected to the Beleghata Canal, and then that would carry it to the Salt Lakes. However, these arrangements were not sufficient. The open sewage of North Calcutta would dry up during summer, leading to clogged sections and stagnation. These were not cleaned regularly. And so what would happen? There would be overflow of dirty water, putrefaction of filth, including human and animal waste. A common sight then in Calcutta were dumps of filthy, decomposing rubbish and open sewers, which were heaven for rats and other vectors. Remember, plague happened. Plague and other infectious diseases also started happening. So before this sad state of conservancy was brought to focus through outbreaks of plague and cholera, all large houses, be it European, be it Indian, had private privies, where, we have seen these carts, which I'll show you later, but they were given receptacles from which this night soil was collected manually early in the morning and taken to large public depots situated throughout the town. So the poorer classes who lived in the slum areas and huts, they shared one privy between 4 or 5 huts. These were called Methar Tattis. They were actually by private enterprise. People built it and then took fees for using them. Somewhat what Dr. Vindeshiri Pathak did later as Sulabh Shauchalaya, but he did it in a much better way, perhaps. The night soil was collected from these private privies by Methars, who were paid fees by the occupiers of the premises and conveyed to depots. These were called Tola Methar depots, which I said were placed at convenient centers. It was then removed to the night soil ghat. There were specific ghats in the riverbank where you could dispose them. They were actually disposed onto boats, and the boats carried them downstream and threw it into the river. Very, very complicated system. So obviously what happened? At each point there were discrepancies. And the Methar Tattis were a grave nuisance. Excreta was sometimes thrown anywhere. The Methar was walking around, found a tank, he disposed it there. Or placed in a narrow trench, or even scattered over the adjoining spot and left to remain there to be dried by the sun. In fact, this is an increasing interesting anecdote by Babu Vishwanath Motilal of Bowbajar. He complained to the committee that whereas the methods were formerly not permitted to remove the night soil except at an advanced hour of the night, later they were allowed to do it during the day. So in 1837, he said they were walking down the streets and high roads with baskets of filth full of stink on their heads at any hour of the day. When it happens to the lot of a person who has just had a hearty meal to fall before any one of these methods, it is needless to say how it is felt by them. So this is what he writes, and he complains the ghat keepers also, they have to be bribed by the poor methods to allow them to throw the night soil into the river. The chairman of the justices was aware that only a small portion of the night soil ever found its way to the ghat. He knew it. 90% were being thrown into public drains under cover of the night. But he also realized that Kolkata had almost 200 tons of night soil daily. If all of it was to be thrown into the Hooghly, that would be more dangerous. So he just kept quiet. Now, fortification of ditches and holes left after excavating, people were always building houses. So there were ditches, refuse used to be dumped there. Low land was filled up, as of now also, for development. First of all, the ditch to the east end of the old Fort William, near GPO now, provided place to dump the refuse, but it filled up by 1766. Later, they started dumping in Maratha ditch. And often, overseers dumped the refuse in tanks and depressions on private lands. In fact, the beautiful Strand Bank, which we have now, was built in this way itself. At night, then, the refuse was removed by bullock carts. A single bullock cart carried half a ton of refuse, and a double bullock carried 2 tons. Now, when these carts used to move across the city, the stench was unbearable, and obviously flies and other nuisance would happen. The main impediment was that we didn't have good roads, and a bullock cart, especially in monsoon, will get bogged down. It will not be able to move in those roads. And the maintenance, now you have to maintain those bullocks, the carts and everything. So the corporation had go-khanas. They were kept there. That became increasingly expensive and difficult. So as population was growing and the city of palaces was expanding, it meant that we had to find out places for dumping the garbage beyond the city. That is how the square mile came into existence. In 1865, Calcutta Corporation acquired a square mile of land in the Salt Lake region for garbage dump and operations essential to drainage, like they had needed to have canals, sewage canals, pumping stations, etc. In 1859, the commissioners in their report complained that these localities were already beyond convenient distance, especially during rains. Again, the carts are not being able to reach there. So they introduced the refuse railway. I remember when we were very young, I think I was only about 4 or 5 years old, when we used to go to Dakshineshwar, sometimes we used to find these refuse carts going in front, and we used to be terrified that if such a cart comes in front of us, well, not only the stench, the speed and everything would be terrible. But so bullock carts were used to empty the garbage into railway wagons at 6 large loading platforms. The railway was originally 8 miles, became 12 miles, and subsequently was 15 miles. And it removed about 1,000 tons of refuse daily to the dumping ground at the square mile. Now, Dr. James Martin, surgeon at the Native Hospital in Dharamtala, this was one of the earlier hospitals, one of the oldest, which were changed later on. He wrote a note on the medical topography of Calcutta and its suburbs. Martin argued that the epidemics of various fevers, Calcutta was known for its fevers. Lots of fevers happened. So we had fever hospitals separately. Fevers that beset Calcutta could only be ameliorated by environmental improvements. That is your public health. To link up disease with these other elements. Disease is not only about understanding the agent and treating it. It is understanding the other factors which are leading to it. And that was perhaps one of the first ideas. His report prompted the governors to set up the Fever Hospital Committee, which carried out an inquiry. And their report was a major source for understanding sanitary and public health conditions. So these frequent epidemic outbreaks which happened in Kolkata during that time, plague, cholera, malaria, etc., also smallpox. Calcutta's Dept vaccination had to be done, but people had very little respect for rules and regulations. You can see on the other hand, on the other side of the slide, rules, the measures to be adopted. That was there in a book. But people were actually blaming each other for failure of vaccination for disease outbreaks. They said shiploads of infected pilgrims returning from Mecca have brought these diseases. Same thing happened in COVID. Why I'm saying is history always teaches you. What happened during COVID? We said people coming back from the Jamaat, attendants in Delhi, they were the ones who transferred the illness to the different parts of the country. Unknown numbers were infected by patients seeking treatment from priests in any of the Calcutta's 32. We had 32 temples dedicated to the goddess of smallpox. So it was seen those who went for treatment to those were actually spreading it more. And the victims were mostly young children. There was a popular saying that the Indian parents were told never to count children as members of the family, nor to leave them any money unless they have been attacked and have recovered from smallpox. Such was the mortality. So another interesting account about inoculation. It's not that there is a difference between inoculation and vaccination. I think most of you know about it, but we'll touch upon it. Inoculation is an age-old practice in this country. In the 17th century, smallpox inoculation was actually practiced in India by a particular sect of Brahmins. So this report is by Dr. Oliver Colt in his account of the diseases of Bengal. The operation of inoculation, called by the natives as Tika, has been known in the Kingdom of Bengal, as near as I can learn, about 150 years, and according to records was performed by one, he meant Dhanantari, a physician of Champanagar, a small town by the side of Ganges. And the method of performing this operation was that they took a little of pus and dipped these at the point of a pretty large, sharp needle and made punctures on the deltoid muscle or on the forehead and covered it with paste of boiled rice. So what happened was the place where the punctures were made commonly festered, it got infected and pus was formed. And the puncture blackened, dried up with other pustules. Then came the fever. Fever later or sooner, according to age and strength. They kept the patient under the coolest regimen they can think of. At the same time, they gave warm medicines internally. Dr. John Zephaniah Hallwell, he also gave a similar account from Bengal. Inoculation is, here it's a little bit more detailed, so I'd like to share it with you. Inoculation is performed by a particular tribe of Brahmins who actually came down from the colleges at Benares during this time. They divided themselves into small parties of 3 or 4 each. And when the Brahmins began to inoculate, still the vaccination is carried out in the same way. They move from house to house. They operate at the door. Now, parents were asked, where do you want your child to be inoculated? How many scratches do you want? And things like that. So they prefer the outside of the arm. Previous to the operation, the operator takes a piece of cloth, gives it a dry friction here for about 8 to 10 minutes. And then with the small instrument, he makes the wounds. Actually, it was an iron instrument, about 4.5 inch. It's like a large pro quill. Middle is twisted. And the other end was like that of a ear picker. The operators hold this like a pen and very dexterously, they give these scarifications. Now, and all the while from the time they start the dry friction to the end of bandaging, they go on reciting portions of the worship to be paid to the female divinity. But this rag is preserved. The one full of pus is preserved and again taken on to the next year. So, and then instructions were given. For 1 month from the day of inoculation, prohibition of fish, milk and ghee. Early on the morning succeeding the operation, 4 kolans or barukulshi of cold water was poured over, repeated every morning and evening. Why? They wanted fever to come on. So once they started having fever, commonly happens at the 3rd day, they keep on pursuing the cold bath until the scabs begin to change their color. Confinement to the house is forbade. Inoculated people will go around spreading the infection so that other people also get immune. Regimen consists of cold things like plantains, kola, sugarcane, watermelons, rice, gruel, etc., poppy seeds, posto, cold water. And so after giving these instructions, the patients will have to give a puja. It was just like about 1 penny sterling at that point of time, 1 pound of koris, and goes to another house. So it was an interesting thing which was happening very interestingly at that time. And these are some of the examples of lancets which were used in the early part for vaccination as well. In 1787, government erected a hospital for smallpox inoculation at Dum. But there were restrictions. You can see breastfeeding children were not inoculated. Above 1 year of age, they were inoculated, etc. Ultimately, what happened, understanding that these things are linked to sanitation, a sanitation team was constituted, led by the sanitary commissioner, supported by a staff of superintendents, inspectors, and vaccinators. And what they did was, what we did in polio later on also, was protective barriers. They divided the outer part of Kolkata into circles and tried to vaccinate all in circles, so that people coming into Kolkata would already be passing through those circles and get immunized, perhaps. I cannot give an oration in PG Hospital without speaking of malaria in those days. So Calcutta was never free from malaria. The situation worsened in the early 19th century because we were building railway tracks, we were having irrigation canals. So it was a boon for all the vectors. There was a lot of water collection in all this. Now we do health impact assessment, at least we ask people to do. That what will happen if you do this? Will there be more vector breeding, etc.? It was not thought of at that time. So according to a survey report, and this was the survey report picture there, you can see, throughout Kolkata, Anopheles rossi was very prevalent, increasing much in parts bordering on central Calcutta, Enteley, Circular Road, and Belgache, and some parts Park Street. Some others were also seen, both Culex and Mancinites. A similar increase was noticeable in several of the southern and eastern suburbs. So all this was very prevalent in Calcutta. The vectors were very prevalent. But Calcutta has a glorious presence. This picture here is Ronald Ross's own report. He used to analyze all these parasites, and this is what he drew also. And the other thing is a very interesting thing, a malaria warning poster, where people are also always told that what you can do. We'll come to it later. But let's come to Ronald Ross. Ronald Ross was born in Uttar Pradesh in 1857. He was the son of a general of the Indian Army. He studied medicine because his father wanted him to do it, not because he actually wanted it. He wanted to be a writer, he wanted to be a poet. In fact, he wrote 3 novels and 4 collections of poetry. However, he himself has said, the work of scavengers must precede that of philosophers, artists, and politicians. And so he did. So I take pride in following his footsteps of being a scavenger as in public health, and because that precedes everything else. In 1881, Ross joined the Indian Medical Service. He spent time in various places, including Bangalore, Calcutta, Andamans, Hyderabad. And actually, we do not know, few of us know, that Ross was the person for setting up the first sanitation program in India in 1886. So when Ross became interested in malaria, the theory was that it was miasma, bad air, that was causing malaria. He was not convinced. Ross was actually holidaying in Kunur near Uti, where he found out these people, even when they're holidaying, they go on doing work. Not very good people to stay with. But he found out 2 varieties of Anopheles that were carriers of the germ. He was very unconventional in his methods of testing. He used to always keep a bottle full of mosquitoes at hand. And he would pay the patients a rupee each to be bitten by the mosquito, after which he dissected and examined them until on 20th August 1896, a patient Hussein Khan, his blood showed the dapple-winged Anopheles mosquito as a carrier of the parasite Plasmodium. So Ross was actually transferred to Calcutta on 29 June 1898. In Calcutta, what you see now was then a dilapidated laboratory of a recently retired physiologist. He entered there. He advertised for assistants whom he would pay from his own pocket. So there were 20 applicants, but he chose Muhammad Bucks because he said Muhammad Bucks looked most rascally of the lot. And therefore, he was likely to have considerable intelligence. And there was another named Parbuna who actually disappeared after the first payday. But Muhammad Bose became very devoted to Ross. He would even sleep in the laboratory floor at night to keep stray cats from killing the experimental animals. Ross directed Muhammad Bose to capture the mosquitoes, hoping to find those pigmented cells within the insect stomach. So Bose was very devoted. He climbed through the sewers, the drains, the stinking tanks, and brought back all kinds of mosquitoes. Ross sent his assistants to the bazaar to try to induce patients to come on payment. Actually, at that time, plague was also raging, and plague inoculation was being given. People had a lot of reservations about it. So some beggars did come, but when they saw that their fingers would be pricked and blood would be taken, they just left the money and everything and fled. So left with no choice, Ross turned to birds again. His lab filled with live crows, pigeons, weaver birds, sparrows. Muhammad Bose would snare all them and bring them. Into the cages covered with mosquito netting went the mosquitoes. So then he did a long series of experiments to establish that Culex was the carrier of bird malaria and Anopheles, the vector of human malaria. But remember, all was not easy for Ross also. Many of us get depressed. Oh, I'm not being recognized. I'm not getting enough recognition or appreciation or support. Ross actually did these studies in desperate haste. He had feared that the hostile superiors would interrupt his work. He was forbidden to publish any of his results, though he had to send detailed summaries to the headquarters. But anyway, he was unperturbed by all this and continued his work till on 2nd July. He found a large cell with several thread-like bodies in the thorax of the mosquito. On 4th July, he found it to be the salivary gland, which was where these bodies were there. And by July 8th, he was sure. Malaria was passed back to the birds in the mosquito's saliva during the act of biting. So the mode of transmission was identified. I'll just touch upon a couple of stories on plague. Why I mention it is because still during epidemic outbreaks, a lot of misinformation, misconceptions lead to a lot of unprecedented wrong actions on the part of the community or the population. Fear of plague regulations was widely prevalent in Calcutta even before its presence was announced by municipal officials. There were stories about demolition of houses, burning of articles, report of public dishonoring of women by police because this was happening in Bombay. So it was so much so that in 1898, when a dead body was found in the central Calcutta slum, the then municipal health officer, Dr. Cook, started destroying these houses. People were very concerned both to go to the hospital because they said preserving the purity of caste and dignity of their women folk in the hospitals, plague hospitals, was impossible. So, in fact, Ramakrishna Mission brought out a plague manifesto requesting citizens not to spread rumors. There will be no lack of effort in treating the afflicted patients under special care and supervision, giving respect for all the religion, caste, and parda of women. But slum dwellers' fear increased further when Calcutta Corporation actually formed ward-level vigilance committees who were empowered to do all these things. So Dr. Cook writes, on 29th and 30th of April, there was a regular stampede by rail, river, and road. Everybody was going away from Calcutta. Men and women left their houses with hardly any preparation. In many cases, even not knowing where they were going. Gariwalas charged 8 to 10 rupees for a 6-hour drive. Palkis were not willing to carry people for any amount of money. Women who had never left their houses except in closed carriages now had to walk. The railway station and the bridge were blocked and besieged by a continuous crowd, and many people were even crushed to death. So you can imagine, myths, misconceptions, and spread of rumors can really create havoc. In fact, it was also reflected so much in our novels and literature. I will not go through all that, but Chandra Chattopadhyay in Srikanto, Ashapurna Devi in Shubarnalata, Prathomalo, we do have a lot of references to plague happening and what it led to. Cholera, because it again has a very special place in Calcutta. Since the early 1800s, since we had filthy waters and poor sanitation, cholera was pandemic. It is the first Asiatic cholera pandemic began near Calcutta, and it spread throughout Southeast Asia, Middle East, Eastern Africa, Mediterranean coast, etc. But when it started affecting the troops and officers, the Britishers took cognizance. No longer was it a disease of the poor people. Lack of effective treatment for cholera set the focus on its prevention. So the Cholera Committee was set up. The committee concluded that the cholera was frequent, especially at religious festivals, fairs, epidemics were attributable to importation of the disease by pilgrims. So one thing history teaches us is that fairs, festivals, pilgrim attendance, all this help in spreading disease from one place to other. Dr. James L. Bryden, India's first epidemiologist and government's chief advisor on epidemic cholera, studied cholera extensively, but unfortunately he believed in the miasma theory. So he didn't make much headway. I would like to share this with you. British soldiers and other Europeans residing in cholera wore the cholera belt because we didn't really know how it happened. So you can see the ads for cholera and cholera belt. The cholera belt, a waistband or cummerbund made of fan or silk, keeps away cold and damp. It's a girdle which every foreign resident of India wears day and night. In winter, the belt is made of wool. In summer, it's made of lighter wool. It is never taken off, even when you are sleeping in a temperature of 105 degrees, tossing and moaning and perspiring. Despite the pankha, you still keep on your cholera belt. But no matter what else you shed. Every Anglo-Indian has a couple of dozen of cholera belts. They are said to prevent cholera. And I have no doubt they do so. This was by one of the troopers. At any rate, I never heard any wearer of cholera belt whom cholera ever seized upon. So cholera belts were sold in great numbers. But again, Calcutta has a very big role in the history of cholera. In 1883, Robert Koch, who had visualized the infectious organism in Alexandria, subsequently cultured it for the first time in Calcutta. So you see, we have a lot of greats. Again, after the second pandemic happened, a commission was set up, and again it pointed out that city's conservancy and water supply. I haven't spoken of drinking water earlier. In its earlier years, Calcutta's water supply was from open tanks, wells, and the river Hooghly. In fact, staunch Hindus would only have Ganges water. Vaishnav Charan Sheth, he made a fortune by supplying holy Ganges water to far-off places. Wealthy Hindus actually got their supply either from the town of Hooghly upstream or even from Khulna, now in Bangladesh, because they thought that it was purer there. And river water actually was fit for drinking only from October to March. From April till the onset of monsoons, it was saline and turbid. They did go through a bit of filtration with alum and all that at the household level. But further away from the tanks or the rivers, people were actually having very turbid, poor quality drinking water. So they enlarged the great tank of Dalhousie Square, built up many tanks, but were not cleaned enough, didn't have enough sweepers, even cleaners. So these tanks or ponds became the sources of disease transmission. But finally, there was the vaccine. And this was the person, the white person who's sitting there, again deserves a lot of our gratitude. Waldemar Mordecai Wolf Hafkin. Many of you have heard of him. He was a Russian Jewish bacteriologist. His career was blighted in Russia because he refused to convert to Russian Orthodoxy. So he went off to Paris. He started working in Pasteur Institute. He was the first microbiologist who developed and used vaccines against cholera and bubonic plague. Actually, why I especially think he was very special, because he risked his own life and performed the human test on himself. Reported his findings on 30th July to the Biological Society. There was a stir in the press, but unfortunately his senior European official medical establishments and even Mechnikov and Pasteur, they did not accept it. So he decided to move to India, where hundreds and thousands were dying from cholera. At first, he was met with deep suspicion. In fact, they even tried to assassinate him during a terrible outbreak of cholera. But he inoculated 25,000 people, reducing the death rate among them by 70%. Again, he tried the vaccine of bubonic plague on himself, went and vaccinated other people, reduced mortality by 50%. In August 1895, He reported to the Royal College of Physicians in London, and that is why he's a great man. Though Pasteur did not recognize his findings, he dedicated his entire successes to Pasteur. So this is what happened. I have dwelt with a lot of stories. I hope that it has made you interested to look back a bit before you undertake any research, any paradigm shifts in public health, because it not only in public health, in any discipline, it's very important to look back before you look forward. Let us develop critical thinking. Let us look at these things in their context. And thank you very much for celebrating with me the history of public health in this great city, walking down the memory lanes. Thank you.
What was the situation there? So how we became the second largest city of the empire? Such scenario.
Okay, how you consider a city as large? Because of course there are certain issues: the population, the number of houses, the number of establishments you have, and of course it was the capital of British India at that time when we talk about. So as a capital, it did receive a lot of inputs in terms of organizational and systematic developments. But again, let me share with you one thing important was that, like always, the least money, I didn't include that slide, the least money was given to civic amenities. So that's what happens, and it gradually reflects, and ultimately for reasons, not because Calcutta was lacking in civic amenities, but other reasons made the British move away. And then we had our own trials and tribulations to face. But how it became, perhaps it was a place where British did give a lot of attention to developing their organizations, their systems, a good place for trade. And yes, I think that's the reason.
And what was the role of Eden, what should I say, traditional medicine against this?
Okay,
you
yes.
were talking mostly about
I have taken some specific diseases to talk about traditional medicine, particularly smallpox, particularly cholera. But for all of us, we are comfortable with tradition. We are comfortable with what has been happening for a long time. So you can see that when hospitals were built, people refused to go into hospitals because as culturally, particularly women were never admitted to the hospital. So, and it took a long while for traditional people or the traditional followers of medicine to get trained. People were also not trained in the Western system of medicine. Till today, there are people visiting these traditional healers for different reasons, particularly in the realm of pediatric areas or, alternate systems of medicine still flourish. Some of it is built on good science, some of it is not. So there are various ways in which people are trying to now understand more. Tradition has its good also. So let's learn from what is good. But at that time, yes, there was a lot of mortality and morbidity, particularly childbearing was associated with a lot of maternal mortality. We know that morbidity is also, and not only for smallpox, infant mortality was very high. So much of it was due to the first responder being the traditional healer. So that might be the reason.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Being an oration, I guess we
You have to
ask questions.
Anyway, but I'll be
agreeable
open.
then. There are. This is if the students are interested in asking, I think we can take the meeting.
For the students, I think we have never really thought about the history of public health.
We also don't spread the history.
Yes.
Whether it is health, whether it is engineering, whether it is.
But it's so interesting and useful as well.
In every sphere, I feel it. So important.
So
Any
good.
questions from the
Or
students?
any comments they have?
I'm sure there are. They will probably do it on a one-on-one.
Being my colleagues in the...
No, she's rushed from medical college to come here. No, it's interesting, and you raised the question of that how was it the second largest city? The question that always comes to my mind is that considering we had malaria, we had typhoid, we had cholera, we had plague, we had smallpox, we had so many diseases, and yet what attracted the British to come here? So there must have been something very attractive.
Trade was a very important issue. Trade, because
Yeah.
port was
But they still
very
came
large.
despite all these problems, and I think there were a lot of discoveries which happened,
And they
including
even died as well.
including the beverage that we have. We would
Yes.
never have had gin and tonic had we
Yes.
not had malaria,
Yes,
because
of
that
course.
was used for the prophylaxis of malaria.
That
But
I suppose you know. But anyway,
Right?
that's a different
So if you
story.
go back and you see a can of tonic water, it has a certain amount of quinine in it. So we do teach that to our pharmacology students, that was used for chemoprophylaxis, and it really did help the British soldiers. It was literally given to them. The quinine was very bitter, so because it had to be given to them, a spoonful of medicine. So they said, okay, that's how the drink sort of, you had it as a sundowner. So if you have no questions, we'll move forward. But really, thank you so much for taking us through such a wonderful journey, so close to our hearts, because you showed the malaria clinic, the laboratory where Ronald Ross actually worked. It still exists, and if you move, it's very much there. So that's something which is very interesting. So this institute also has contributed in a major way. There are questions that I'll probably ask you later, but many new words also, I think, came up. The word method. I don't think Mathor has, right. But I was also very fascinated by a cholera belt. Is that what's called a kamarband?
Yeah, it's like a waistband.
Yeah.
Much to the style of Kamarband.
Right.
But I was thinking about the plight of those soldiers in this terrible heat. They have to keep on wearing that day and night. The light wool, the deep, heavy wool, whatever might it be, but it must have been torturous.
Okay, so we'll conclude today's oration, and as a very small token of our appreciation, we have a small token of appreciation that we have, that I will request the President to please hand over. Hey, light up with that hand. Okay. So with that, we conclude today's oration. Thank you all for being with us, and thank you, Madhumita Di, for making it so special.
Very good audience.
Yeah.
I was not expecting. I was expecting. In fact, this year I have attended a lecture where it was less than 20.
Okay.
Yeah, good for it.
Sure. Thanks, wonderful. Shall we close it for today? Yeah. So thank you. We'll conclude here.
Sharing Kolkata first.